The small bell above the cafe door jingled as an old man stepped inside. The morning was gray and cold, with soft rain falling outside. Harold Wilson brushed a few drops off his shoulders and held the door open. For a woman leaving with her child. His hands shook slightly, but his manners stayed steady. He nodded to her, then moved toward the counter with slow, careful steps. Harold was in his late 70s, dressed in a simple coat that had seen many winters. His boots were old but polished. His gray hair was trimmed neatly, though it stuck out under his faded cap. Most noticeable were the scar's deep lines that ran from his temple to his neck, across his left cheek and down one hand. They were old scars, rough and pale, the kind that came from burns long healed. Inside the cafe, the smell of coffee and baked bread mixed in the air. A few people sat chatting, the sound of spoons clinking against mugs. Near the counter, a group of teenagers laughed loudly, their phones glowing in their hands. They noticed Harold right away. One of them, a boy in a leather jacket, nudged his friend and whispered something. The others turned, smirking. "Hey, look," the boy said, his voice just loud enough for others to hear. "That guy looks like he came out of a war movie. Guess he didn't win?" The laughter that followed was small but sharp. It cut through the quiet cafe. Harold heard it, though he didn't turn. He had heard that kind of laugh before long ago, in different places. He just kept his eyes on the counter, waiting for his turn. Lisa, the young waitress behind the counter, noticed the scene. She had worked the morning shift for almost 2 years, and she had seen Harold come in several times before. He was always polite, never complained, and always tipped a little extra no matter what he ordered. Her heart ached as she saw the smirks at the corner table. "Good morning, Mr. Wilson," she said brightly. "The usual? Black coffee, to sugars?" Harold nodded with a faint smile. "Yes, ma'am. You always remember." Lisa smiled back. "How could I forget? You always come when the weather's like this." He chuckled softly. "Old bones like warm places," he said, fishing for coins in his coat pocket. The teenagers were still watching him. One of the girls whispered, "Why doesn't he wear something over that face? It's scary." Another boy laughed. "Probably wants attention. Bet he tells fake war stories to get free coffee." Harold's hand paused as he placed his money on the counter. His eyes didn't lift, but the faintest sigh escaped his lips. Lisa saw it. She leaned forward and whispered, "Don't mind them, sir. Some people just don't understand respect anymore." Harold nodded slowly. "It's all right, miss. I've heard worse. They're young. They'll learn someday." He carried his cup to a small corner table by the window. The rain streaked the glass, blurring the world outside into gray and silver. Harold watched the drops slide down, his reflection faint in the window, an old soldier looking at a world that had moved on. He stirred his coffee slowly, lost in thought. His eyes softened as he remembered faces of men he once served with, friends who never made it back. He thought of the desert heat, the helicopter blades, the smell of smoke and fuel, the cries of soldiers calling for help. His hand trembled slightly as he lifted the cup. He still saw fire in his dreams sometimes, but he never told anyone. Behind him, laughter broke out again. The teenagers were showing each other videos on their phones, but one of them made another joke, glancing toward Harold. "Maybe he burned himself trying to cook," the boy said, snickering. The laughter was louder this time. People turned. Lisa frowned. She wanted to say something but stopped herself. She knew Harold wouldn't want a scene. Still, the hurt in his eyes was clear. He lowered his cup and stared at the table for a moment, silent. Then the cafe door opened again, and the sound of the rain grew louder for a second before the door shut. A tall man stepped in, water glistening off his coat. He wore a dark green uniform with metals shining faintly under the warm lights. His posture was straight, his expression calm but commanding. The chatter in the cafe softened almost instantly. Everyone knew who he was. It was General Marcus Hayes, a highly respected officer known throughout the state. His picture had been in the local newspaper more than once, usually at ceremonies or veterans events. He was a man people stood up for when he entered a room. The general removed his cap, shook off the rain, and scanned the cafe. His eyes paused when he saw Harold sitting by the window. For a brief moment, his face changed, his eyes widened slightly, then softened into something between shock and deep emotion. He walked toward the counter first, greeted Lisa politely, and ordered a coffee. But his eyes kept drifting toward the old man in the corner. Lisa noticed. "You know him, sir?" she asked quietly as she poured his coffee. The general nodded slowly. "I believe I do. That man's name is Harold Wilson, isn't it?" "Yes, sir," she said. "He comes here often. He's always quiet, keeps to himself." General Hayes looked at him again, studying the old soldier. "I knew that face," he murmured, "though I never thought I'd see it again." Lisa was curious, but before she could ask, the general picked up his cup and started walking across the cafe. I followed him. The teenagers went quiet, unsure what was happening. Harold looked up as the shadow fell across his table. His eyes widened in surprise as he recognized the uniform. He began to rise, his voice uncertain. "Sir?" The general's voice was steady, but there was warmth in it. "Harold Wilson?" "Yes, sir," the old man said. "That's me." The general set his coffee down, stood straight, and raised his hand in a formal salute. It was sharp, crisp, the kind of salute that carried weight. The cafe fell completely silent. Even the soft hum of the refrigerator seemed to stop. Harold blinked, confused. "Sir, what are you doing?" The general lowered his hand slowly, his eyes bright with emotion. "It's been a long time, Sergeant." "Too long. You probably don't remember me." "But I remember you." Harold frowned softly, trying to recall. "I'm sorry, sir. My memory isn't what it used to be." "Where did we, Fallujah?" the general said quietly. 2004. The third convoy ambush. Harold froze. The cup in his hand trembled slightly. The name pulled him back 3 years in an instant. He saw the smoke, the sand, the fire. He saw men trapped, and a helicopter descending through chaos. He remembered dragging bodies through the flames. "I thought you didn't make it," Harold whispered. The general smiled faintly. "You carried me out yourself. I would have died there if not for you." Harold's eyes widened, his voice trembling. "You were Captain Hayes?" "Yes," the general said softly. "I became a general years later. But you—" He stopped, emotion catching in his throat. "You're the reason I had that chance." The teenagers stared, stunned. Lisa stood frozen behind the counter, her hand over her mouth. The other customers exchanged looks of disbelief. The general straightened his back again, looking round the room. "You see this man?" he said, his voice firm but calm. "This man saved my entire unit." Whispers rippled through the cafe. The teenagers looked down, ashamed. The general continued. "Every medal I've ever worn, every day I've lived since that battle, it's because of him." Harold's eyes glistened. His lips pressed together. He didn't know what to say. For so many years, no one had remembered. The war had ended, the medals were forgotten, and the scars were all that remained. The general extended his hand. Harold hesitated, then took it. Their handshake was strong, full of silent understanding. The cafe was still quiet, but something had changed. The laughter was gone. The air was heavy with respect. The general said softly, "I've spent years trying to find you, Sergeant, and to think I'd run into you here in a small cafe on a rainy morning." Harold smiled faintly. "Life's full of surprises, sir." The general smiled too. "It is. But some meetings are meant to happen." Harold looked at the people staring at them, then lowered his eyes. "You didn't have to salute me, sir." The general shook his head. "You earned it long before I ever did." He took his cup of coffee and sat down across from Harold. The two men began to talk quietly, sharing memories no one else could truly understand. Outside, the rain slowed, and light began to push through the clouds. At the corner table, the teenagers whispered to each other, guilt heavy in their voices. One of them said, "Man, we were making fun of a hero." Another nodded. "We didn't know." Lisa gave them a hard look, but she said nothing. The lesson had already been learned. In the quiet that followed, Harold laughed softly at something the general said. For the first time in years, he looked at peace. And though no one knew it yet, that quiet cafe would remember that morning for a long time, the day an old veteran walked in alone and left surrounded by respect. The cafe stayed silent after the general saluted Harold. Every person in the room could feel the weight of that moment. The sound of rain outside had faded to a soft drizzle, and even the usual hum of chatter had vanished. It was as if time had stopped for everyone except the two men. Harold stood there quietly, still trying to understand what was happening. He could hardly believe that a man of such rank and respect had remembered him after all these years. General Hayes looked straight into Harold's eyes. His voice was calm, but filled with pride as he spoke 6 simple words. That carried more power than anyone expected. "This man saved my entire unit." Those 6 words changed the air in the room. The teenagers who had been laughing earlier froze in shock. The girl who had called Harold's face scary dropped her phone. The boy in the leather jacket swallowed hard, realizing what he had done. The other customers exchanged glances, their expressions shifting from curiosity to quiet shame. Harold's eyes widened and his lips trembled slightly. For years, he had carried those memories in silence, never expecting anyone to bring them up again. His voice came out soft, almost broken. You remember that day, sir?" The general nodded slowly, emotion visible in his face. "Every detail. The heat, the smoke, the shouting. We were surrounded. You dragged me and 3 others out while you were burned yourself. I remember watching you go back again and again when anyone else would have stopped." Harold blinked rapidly, trying to hold back tears. His voice shook as he whispered, "I just did what any soldier would do." The general smiled faintly. "No, Sergeant. Most men wouldn't have gone back through that fire. You didn't stop until every one of us was safe. You didn't just save soldiers, you saved brothers." Lisa stood frozen behind the counter. Her heart was pounding in her chest. She had seen Harold come in so many mornings, so humble, so quiet. Never once had he said a word about his past. Now, hearing the truth, she realized she had been serving coffee to a hero every single week without knowing it. The general turned toward the room. His voice grew stronger. "I want everyone here to understand something," he said, his tone firm but calm. "The scars you see on this man aren't something to mock. They are symbols of courage, of sacrifice, of honor." No one spoke. The teenagers stared at the floor, faces red. The boy in the leather jacket looked like he wanted to disappear. The general took a breath. "There's a reason I stand today. It's because this man didn't give up when the rest of us were broken. He risked his life for others. He carried me on his back through fire and shrapnel when I couldn't even move. He didn't ask for medals. He didn't ask for recognition. He just wanted his brothers to live." The cafe was so quiet that the sound of the rain tapping against the windows seemed loud. Harold's hand shook slightly as he placed his cup on the table. "Sir, I didn't think anyone even remembered that day," he said quietly. "It was so long ago. Everyone moved on. I just tried to live a simple life." The general smiled gently. "Sometimes the world forgets the names of heroes, but some of us never forget the faces that saved us." He looked around at the room again, his voice steady and full of respect. "If any of you are proud of this country, if you value the peace you live in, you stand for this man." For a second, no one moved. Then Lisa placed down her towel, straightened her apron, and stood up tall. Her voice was soft but firm. "Yes, sir." One by one, the customers began to rise. Chairs slid quietly across the floor. Even the teenagers stood, awkward at first, then more certain as they realized it was the right thing to do. The whole cafe stood in silence as Harold looked around in disbelief. His eyes glistened. His lips parted slightly, and his voice came out weak. "You don't have to do that for me," he said. But the general shook his head. "We do, Sergeant. You've done enough for all of us." For a long moment, everyone simply stood there. No one touched their coffee. No one spoke. It was a rare silence filled with deep respect. Harold raised his hand slowly and returned the general's salute. His fingers trembled, but his eyes were steady. The general's gaze softened with pride. Lisa wiped away tears that had gathered in her eyes. She walked toward Harold's table with gentle steps and placed a fresh cup of coffee in front of him. "This one's on the house, sir," she said softly. "It's the least we can do." Harold smiled faintly, his voice filled with warmth. Thank you, young lady. You're very kind. She smiled back. No, sir. You're the kind one. The general sat down across from Harold again. They began to talk in quiet tones. People around them listened respectfully, not wanting to interrupt. The general asked about old comrades, the places they had served, the days when the world looked different. Harold answered, his voice soft, his eyes lost in memories. He talked about the friends he lost, about the letters he used to write home that never got mailed, and about how he had built a new life after leaving the service. After the war, Harold said slowly, I just wanted peace. I didn't need thanks. I just wanted quiet mornings and good coffee. The general nodded. And you've earned every quiet morning, Sergeant. The teenagers whispered among themselves. One of them, the girl who had made fun of Harold first, walked toward him slowly. Her eyes were red from tears. Sir, she said softly, I'm really sorry for what I said earlier. I didn't know. Harold turned to her and smiled kindly. It's all right, young lady. You didn't mean harm. You just didn't understand. The boy in the leather jacket followed. His head was low, his voice shaky. Sir, I'm sorry too. I shouldn't have laughed. I didn't think. Harold reached out his hand and gave the boy a gentle pat on the shoulder. That's how we learn, son. Respect doesn't come from age, it comes from understanding. The general watched the scene with a proud smile. He's teaching you still, he said quietly to the teens. Listen to him. The world needs more people like this man. After a while, the cafe returned to its gentle rhythm. People began to sip their coffee again, but the atmosphere had changed completely. Conversations were quieter, smiles were softer, and every glance toward Harold was filled with respect. Lisa leaned against the counter, watching the old man and the general share stories. It felt like she was witnessing something rare and beautiful, a small moment of history, unfolding in her little cafe. She could already tell this story will live in the hearts of everyone who saw it. When the general finished his coffee, he stood and adjusted his uniform. He looked down at Harold, who was still sitting quietly. Sergeant, he said softly, you might not wear the uniform anymore, but you'll always be part of the family. If you ever need anything and all, you call me. Harold smiled humbly. Thank you, sir, but I have all I need right here. The general smiled. Then I'll make sure everyone else remembers who you are. He turned to the teenagers. Young people, you remember this face. When you see someone like him, you stand tall. You say thank you. They nodded quickly. Yes, sir. As the general left the cafe, the bell over the door jingled again. The sound felt different now, like a small note marking the end of something important. The rain had stopped completely. Sunlight filtered through the gray clouds, shining softly on Harold's table. He sat there for a long moment, looking out the window. The street outside glistened with puddles, and a small rainbow shimmered faintly in the distance. He smiled to himself, sipping the coffee Lisa had brought him for the first time in many years. He felt seen, not as an old man with scars, but as someone whose story still mattered. He thought about his friends, the ones who didn't make it home, and whispered under his breath, they remembered us today. Lisa walked over and asked, You all right, Mr. Wilson? He looked up at her with a gentle smile. Yes, dear, I'm more than all right, she smiled back. You know, everyone's going to be talking about you after this. He chuckled softly. Maybe they'll just talk about respect. That's all I'd like them to remember. She nodded. I think they will. Before leaving, Harold placed a few coins on the counter, as he always did. Lisa tried to stop him. Sir, you don't need to pay. Not today. He smiled. Rules are rules, miss. Even old soldiers follow them. He placed his cap on his head and slowly made his way to the door. The teenagers stood and watched as he passed. The boy in the leather jacket held the door open for him. Thank you, sir, he said quietly. Harold paused, smiled, and nodded. You're welcome, son. Make good choices. Then he stepped out into the soft sunlight, his shadow stretching long across the wet pavement. He walked slowly down the street, his shoulders straight, his step steady. People on the sidewalk glanced at him, and though they didn't know what had just happened inside that cafe, They could sense something noble about the way he carried himself inside. Lisa turned to the teenagers and said softly, "That's what real strength looks like." The boy nodded. "I'll never forget him," and they didn't. Neither did anyone else who had been in that cafe that morning. They all went home and told their families about the old veteran with the scars and the general, who saluted him. Weeks later, someone put up a small framed photo near the cafe counter's simple picture of Harold, sitting by the window, smiling with his coffee. Below it, Lisa had written 6 words on a small brass plate: "This man saved my entire unit." Every customer who came in after that asked about the photo, and every time Lisa told the story. Some left with tears in their eyes, others with quiet smiles, but everyone left with one thou.